I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey Lurkers, welcome to episode 42. Before we get into today's episode, I did want to mention just one housekeeping thing before we get started. June 18th, 2022, so this June, there is a Virginia Bigfoot conference that is hosted by the East Coast Bigfoot Researchers Organization, or ECBRO. It is in Staunton, Virginia, and yours truly will be there. I will be vending. I'll have some merch for you to purchase. So if you're in the area, consider stopping by. There's going to be some other great vendors there. I know that So Sci-Fi and Beyond, who I've mentioned before, Liz, she will be there as well. Plus, there will be a bunch of other vendors. There's a couple other podcasters that are going to be there. There's a ton of great Bigfoot speakers, meaning people speaking about Bigfoot, not Bigfoot coming to speak. Anyway, that is all June 18th, this coming June, so 6 months away. So if you're in the area, mark it on your calendar, grab your tickets. The website for that is vabigfootcon.com, and I will make sure I put that link in the show notes, and I will also be posting that on social media between now and then. So, today's episode, it was a suggestion from a lurker in the UK, David, who sent me some links to help with the research. So a big shout out to him and a huge thank you to you, David. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the Berwyn Mountain incident, which is also known as the British Roswell, or Roswelsh, if you will. This is actually something that I had never heard about before, which I love getting suggestions of topics that I'm not very familiar with, because I love researching and learning new things. It also allows me to go into it with absolutely no bias at all, because it is totally new to me, so it's unfamiliar and I'm learning it for the first time. So it kind of lets me develop my opinion as I research. Also, if I haven't heard it, there's a chance that a larger number of people who are listening perhaps aren't as familiar with it. And that's my goal, to bring you familiar things, but to also introduce people to some topics that they may not already be familiar with. I don't want to produce things that everybody else is doing. So please, if you have suggestions, send them my way. I also realize that me not having heard about a particular UFO incident really isn't a big stretch, because we all know at this point that as far as the paranormal topics go, aliens and UFOs are the one that I'm the least knowledgeable about, because they scare the crap out of me. Aliens terrify me. I don't know why. I mean, I know why. Ghosts are dead people. I know people. Cryptids are animals. I'm familiar with animal behavior, so they're not scary. Aliens, I don't even know what kind of life form they are. I'm guessing they're not carbon-based life forms, so who knows how the heck they're going to react. Anyway, I did want to mention that I did read a short book called The Berwyn Mountain UFO by George Dudding. I'm going to link that in the show notes. It was only around 40 pages, give or take, which was great since I literally read this last night. Yes, procrastination is my middle name. So let's jump in here, shall we? And I'm going to apologize. I'm going to do my best to pronounce things in the Welsh. as best as I can. I did listen and learn, but I'm going to apologize because Welsh, I don't know. I think it's all the consonants. So this entire thing takes place in northeastern Wales, in the area of Berwyn Mountain. The area is isolated and sparsely populated. Cadair Berwyn is 2,730 feet, or 832 meters above sea level, and it's the highest point in Wales outside of the national parks. The word Cadair means chair, and is used because the mountaintops were thought to be the chairs where the ancient gods sat. There is a standing stone in the area. Standing stones are man-made and can be either a single monolith or a circle or ring. Think Stonehenge, though Stonehenge, yes, it's a hedge. They trim it regularly. Think Stonehenge, though probably much smaller in size. They were thought to be used for ceremonies and rituals and date from the Middle European Bronze Age. The European Bronze Age spans from 3000 BC to 1000 BC, so I guess somewhere around 2000 BC, if we pick the middle. Leading up to our main event were some odd happenings going on in northern England and northern Wales. Areas were plagued by nighttime aircraft that were called phantom helicopters or black helicopters that were being investigated by local law enforcement, though no explanation for them was found. On January 16, 1974, the local Evening Sentinel headline read, "Phantom Copter has police baffled." It's unclear what, if any, relation these strange phantom helicopters had with the Berwyn Mountain incident, but I'm not big on coincidence, so that, plus knowing there were black helicopters in the area of Mothman and other UFO incidents, makes me lean to some kind of connection. So on the night of January 23rd, 1974, it was a cold, damp, moonless night in Sandrislow and Sanderfell, two villages only about 3 miles apart at the base of the mountain. Now, just for those of you who might be interested, neither of these towns, when they're spelled, start with the letter S. No, they start with double L's. It looks like it's pronounced Landrillo and Landerfell. Just so you know, but apparently double L's in Welsh have almost an S sound to them. So hopefully I'm doing the pronunciation properly, but I did want to point that out for anybody not familiar with Welsh at all, that it would be Sandrislow and Sanderfell. They're 3 miles apart. They're at the base of Berwyn Mountain. At 8:30 p.m., families were all in for the night for the most part. The work was done for the day. Everybody was relaxing. About that time, there was a loud explosion and the earth shook. Calls poured in to 999, which is the emergency number equivalent to 911 in America. People called reporting the explosion, the shaking, and also seeing strange lights in the sky and on the mountain. There was a bright glow reported coming from the mountains, accompanied by beams of light projecting upward. One witness, Maria Williams, who lived in Sandrislow, reported a very bright light, almost as bright as the sun. At 8:38 p.m. in Slanderfell, Nurse Pat Evans was in her kitchen when she heard a loud explosion. Initially, she thought her stove had blown up, but the stove and the house were undamaged. Her 2 teenage daughters shouted to her, wanting to know what the noise was. They thought that the sound had come from the direction of Berwyn Mountain. Pat attempted to contact her local police, but couldn't reach them. She eventually managed to speak with someone at the district headquarters in Colwyn Bay, which was about 40 miles north. The officer on the phone told her that they had been receiving reports of an explosion, but that they weren't sure what exactly the cause was. Pat asked if it could possibly be an aircraft, and the officer replied, "It could be anything. We really don't know." She and her daughters opted to drive up onto the mountain to see if they could offer assistance. Pat was a nurse, and both of her daughters were trained in first aid. When Pat got her first clear view of the mountaintop, she stopped the car in disbelief. Sitting on the side of the closest peak, Berwyn, was a round, brightly illuminated reddish-orange ball. She and her daughter sat watching it in shock. Pat opened the car window and noted there was no noticeable sound. The object had no perceivable windows or doors. It was a well-defined, uniformly colored, reddish-orange circle that sat there on the mountainside glowing. Pat also noticed smaller white lights that she assumed were vehicle lights. The large round object changed color several times while they were watching it. It went from red to yellow to white and back to red. Pat and her daughters watched the object for about 15 minutes before Pat decided to head back to her house. It was obviously not a plane crash, and it appeared that there were people there at the scene. They drove home. Pat said in one interview that on the way down the mountain, she and her daughters were stopped by a soldier and told to leave the area immediately. Afterwards, Pat said she was not approached by a soldier, though several people present for her interview remembered that she had said it. At the time of the explosion, 14-year-old Hugh Lloyd was at home watching TV with his two sisters in the village of Sandrislow. Their parents were out for the night in the next town. While they watched TV, they felt a thud and the house shook violently. The TV went out. Hugh received several calls from neighbors, most of them talking about seeing something in the sky prior to the explosion. About 25 to 30 minutes after the noise and violent house shaking, there was a knock at the door. Hugh answered it and found a police inspector standing there. There are a couple of interesting things to point out about this policeman. First, he was a senior officer. In the UK, there are constables, then sergeants, then inspectors. This man was an inspector. So a higher-ranking policeman shows up at the home of a farmer after this strange explosion and shaking, meaning someone felt this was significant enough to send a man of higher rank and experience. Stranger still was the fact that the inspector told Hugh Lloyd that he was out of Barmouth office. Barmouth is about 1.5 to 2 hours away from their location there at Berwyn Mountain, but the inspector showed up only 25 to 30 minutes after the event. There is no way, not even in current times, to make the trip from Barmouth to Berwyn Mountain in 30 minutes. The inspector tells Hugh there was a suspected plane crash, and he would like to commandeer the farm's Land Rover to drive onto the mountain to locate the crash site. So Hugh drives the inspector and a couple of other officers up the mountain. Hugh was interviewed about his ride up the mountain. He said, "As the Land Rover nosed carefully along the track that wound through thick forest and bogs, the officers kept their colleagues informed of their progress via their radios. I was expecting we'd find a blazing aircraft with bodies strewn among the wreckage, but they were blinded by the brightest light Hugh had ever seen. They near an area where they see a white light about 2 miles away emanating from the ground." He said, "It must have been about 30 minutes after the explosion we'd heard, while we were in the house. Suddenly the whole sky was lit up by the most incredible white light. Brighter it seemed than even the sun. For close on 30 seconds the skies were filled with this light for as far as you could see." Hugh stated that he has never seen a light like the one he saw that night on the mountain before or since that night in January of 1974. Hugh composed himself and continued on, getting closer to the light, but the Land Rover got stuck. The officers got out of the vehicle to free it, and upon getting back in, told Hugh to take them back down the mountain, please. We're done here. Hugh said, surely they could have made it to the scene on foot. I estimated we could only have been a few hundred yards away by then. Looking back, as I have so many times, I think the officers must have taken a message over their radios, telling them to back off, for reasons I can only guess at. They certainly didn't want to talk to me about it that night. We drove back down the mountain in silence. Hugh also questioned why there would be an order to turn away from a potential crash site. The thud or explosion was felt 60 miles away. Hugh's parents, who were in the neighboring town, heard it and felt it. Other descriptions from witnesses that night said that the shaking was violent. It lifted up beds and threw people from couches as they watched TV. Several people described reddish-orange lights. Some said it looked like a fire. One witness said the light was coal red fire, bright red light, a large perfect circle like a bonfire. You could see lights above and to the right, and white lights moving towards the bottom. Neighbors told Hugh that there were soldiers in the area that night. They were out in the fields and then started knocking on doors, asking to use the telephone because their radios were out or wouldn't work. An RAF search and rescue team was scrambled from Anglesey. RAF stands for Royal Air Force. There were reports that the area was cordoned off for a few days after one local firefighter claimed to have seen a lot of military activity, and that the military presence stayed for about 3 months. Local police, news media, and farmers were not allowed on the mountain where the crash site was located. One witness said that he went up on the mountain with his camera, taking photographs when he was stopped. The person who stopped him took his camera, exposed the film, and told him to leave, that the area was off limits. Remember, this was back way before digital cameras or cell phones, so we only had film cameras, and when the film was exposed to light, it would destroy any photos that had been taken. For anybody who has never used a film camera. There were many different explanations given for the lights on the mountain, including poachers out lamping or spotlighting, where you use a light to shine in the eyes of animals to hunt them. Typically, this is illegal. In the United States, it's frowned upon. You can be arrested and fined. I don't know that it's the same there or that it was the same during that time frame. Other explanations given were rockets, missile tests, and, of course, the airplane crash. Hugh did go back up the mountain to the area where the light had been coming from, and there was no sign at all of any kind of crash. No crater, no scorched earth. In the early 1990s, UFO researcher Margaret Fry was investigating what happened on Berwyn in 1974. While photocopying an artist's impression of the object that Pat Evans had seen, the woman behind the counter ended up explaining that she had gone to Berwyn Mountain that same night and had seen the same type of object on the mountainside, and her car had been turned away by a police roadblock. Additional investigations uncovered accounts of military convoys, a line of cars backed up the mountain trying to get a glimpse of what was going on, and strange red lights. One man kept a detailed diary and noted seeing a strange reddish orb in the sky. Margaret Fry later received information that a man using the pseudonym James Prescott, who was allegedly a retired high-ranking military officer, claimed he had been sent to Slanderfell after the explosion. He and a small team had driven up and collected a number of oblong, coffin-like boxes before driving them to Porton Down. Porton Down is a British government lab that does research into chemical warfare and diseases. I imagine it's possibly similar to Fort Detrick, located in Maryland, where they house several different level 4 viruses like Ebola and Marburg that have no cure. Prescott went on to claim that at the lab, Scientists opened the boxes, and inside were 2 dead aliens who were similar to the description of those seen at Roswell, New Mexico. Basically, the typical gray alien. This account could never be verified. Prescott never wanted to release his real name and would not meet in person. Another witness named Mike Seville told his story of his experience on January 23, 1974. Seville's cottage was on a steep incline above the village of Slanderfell and the same village where Pat Evans lived. He had a clear view of the mountaintops. He and his wife were reading when the house trembled and shook. He went out the front door where he saw a bright circular light in front of him. It was orange and had a defined edge like the sun. The couple were terrified. They bundled their infant up and rushed to the neighboring farm that had a telephone in order to report the incident. They then walked back to their house and stood looking at the ball of light as it hung onto the horizon. 10 minutes later, it dipped down below the horizon and disappeared from view. This would have been the point that Pat Evans and her daughters observed the same object resting on the mountainside. It was estimated that the object was about 22 meters in diameter, or roughly 72 feet. Witnesses said that the object was hanging around prior to the events of January 23rd, and it was seen for up to 3 weeks afterwards. As far back as World War II, strange lights and crafts have been reported near the Berwyn Mountains. Some witnesses have even claimed they've watched these lights land and take off, then disappear over the horizon. After the incident in January, on February 15, 1974, Durant Edwards and Elgar Hughes from Sanderfell claimed to have seen a UFO flying over northeastern Wales. Edwards was a gamekeeper, and he said that he and Hughes were on their way to the local pub when they saw the UFO shaped like a ball with pointed ends hovering in the sky for about 10 minutes. It then suddenly flew off in a straight line at a very fast speed. Edwards was a meticulous diary keeper and wrote about the sighting and noted the time as 6:45 p.m. There were reports, too, that the wreckage of the UFO was taken to a place called Rudloe Manor, which is Britain's version of Area 51. Rudloe Manor is a definite rabbit hole I started traveling down in my research, which is fitting because the place is like a giant human-sized rabbit warren itself. Rudloe Manor is in Wiltshire, about 4 hours from the village of Sandriso in Wales, near the site of the Berwyn incident. Rudloe Manor was used by the RAF as a military installation from 1939 to 2000. On the outside, it looks like a normal manor house, but it's what underneath that makes it intriguing. There are 2 million square feet of tunnels under the manor, left over from quarries that operated there dating back to 1840. Many people speculated that Rudloe Manor was the location where the RAF dealt with UFO reports, and this was actually confirmed in 2010 through a Freedom of Information Act request. This led more people to believe that the facility holds the wreckage from the Berwyn Mountain. There's more to Rudloe Manor, but I don't really want to get too far off topic following tunnels, literally. After the Berwyn Mountain incident, there were reports of strange men in black asking people strange questions. An employee of the local hotel said that the very next day after the incident, strangers in dark suits had checked in for a whole week and spent every day up on the mountain. These men were explained away as members of the Geological Survey investigating seismic activity. If you're unfamiliar with Men in Black, and no, I'm not talking about Tommy Lee Jones or Will Smith, though they are excellent movies, you can check out episode 23, Men in Black. Eventually, the Ministry of Defense released their UFO files to the National Archives. In the files, their explanation of the Berwyn Mountain incident involved a large meteor falling and an earthquake. happening at the exact same time. Now, I was curious about the possibility of earthquakes in Britain, and I'm here to tell you they happen. There are fault lines that run through Wales, and there are earthquakes, notably the Welsh Borderland Fault System. There was seismic activity recorded the night of the incident on January 23, 1974, that registered 3.5 on the Richter scale. Since then, there was activity on July 19, 1984, in northwest Wales that was the largest recorded onshore quake in the UK, registering at 5.4. Two more seismic events happened a month later, registering 4.0 and 4.3. April 2, 1990, there was a 5.1 quake with the epicenter in Wales. So UK earthquakes are possible and do happen. The seismic activity from the Berwyn Mountain incident on January 23, 1974, as reported by the Institute of Geological Sciences, which is now the British Geological Survey, happened at 8:38 p.m., with the epicenter near Bala, about 3 miles west of Sanderfell at the northeastern end, Shin Tegid, or Lake Bala. Interesting to note that Lake Bala is apparently home to Tegi, a lake monster. That's a new one for me, and it's a whole other episode in the future. So if you're listening and you have info, send it to me. There definitely, without a doubt, was seismic activity the night of the Berwyn Mountain incident. But there was also a giant bolide meteor at the same time. A bolide, by specific definition, is an exceptionally bright meteor that explodes in the atmosphere, but it is subject to more than one meaning. It's also used to reference fireballs as bright or up to twice as bright as the full moon, or any large crater-forming impacting body. The observatory director for the Liverpool Astronomical Society said in regards to a meteor creating some of the phenomena, "To produce a tremor of this scale, it would have to be of tremendous size. Personally, I would have thought it unlikely, but nevertheless it is possible." We either have two separate naturally occurring but rare phenomena, an earthquake and a giant meteor, happening at exactly the same time, or one super rare natural phenomena, a bolide happening, hitting the Earth hard enough to create seismic readings. Oh, and it manages to hit the Earth hard enough to create seismic readings, but doesn't make a crater. The other explanation of the strange light on the mountain was what is referred to as earthquake lights. Sometimes before or during earthquakes, people report seeing strange lights in the sky. I looked into the phenomena, and most often the light is described as blue or white, similar to lightning. There is some debate if it's even an actual thing. So what exactly happened that cold night in January in 1974 on the Berwyn Mountains? I'm not sure exactly where I stand on this one. I personally think an explanation of two incredibly rare things happening simultaneously is a reach. I think a bolide meteor is a feasible explanation only if it impacts, and if it had, there would be a crater, and yet there's no crater, there's no scorched earth. I've watched and listened to interviews with some of the witnesses, namely Hugh Lloyd, and I believe they are credible and saw something unexplainable that night on the mountain. It's hard to explain away so many witnesses of the strange light on the mountainside. Earthquake lights are not described in the same way the lights on the mountain were described. Also, we've mentioned reddish-orange lights before in the Phoenix Lights episode 14, where witnesses referred to the lights as being amber or reddish-orange. I read a comment by someone that mentioned that UFOs seem to be attracted to ancient sacred sites, and they pointed out that the Berwyn Mountains are said to be the entrance to Annwn, the Celtic underworld. That, coupled with the standing stones that I mentioned, that were used in ancient times for rituals and ceremonies makes you wonder. And it just occurred to me that if we apply Occam's razor to this, and for those not familiar with Occam's razor, it's a rule that says the simplest theory should be preferred over a more complex theory. So in this situation, in my interpretation of it, we have crashed unknown object, or we have an incredibly rare astronomical event happening at the same exact time as an earthquake. In this case, for me, in my opinion, the crash of an unknown object is the simplest answer. I'm not saying it's aliens, but... So that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again to David for the topic suggestion. I hope I have done it justice. If you have a topic suggestion or a personal paranormal story to share, please send those to lurkpodcast@yahoo.com, or you can send it via direct message through social media. You can find our social media links on our website, lurkpodcast.com, and you can find all of our episodes there as well. You can, of course, find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Also, voting is still happening at paranormalitymag.com/vote25. Voting starts the 21st of each month and ends the 20th of the following month for their top 10 paranormal podcasts. Please consider taking a moment to vote. You can vote up to 3 times per email per month. Thanks to everyone who has listened to, shared, rated, or voted for the podcast. It is appreciated more than I can say. Seriously. And until next time, keep lurking.